2, 1 Victor, 2 packs, Recon 1, over.
And I believe we are live.
Hello, hello. It's game time.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this series of live Q&A session. Well, this is more of a review and discussion, honestly. It's something that Josh and I have talked about wanting to do more in the past, which is engage with you guys out there in the audience. Because there's a lot of experience and knowledge, and even Josh and I, the way we started as, a young man from Massachusetts, a young man from Hong Kong, both locations where we couldn't shoot a lot. And we asked a lot of questions, and we had to have thick skin to ask said questions to people on the range. And sometimes it ends up in good, where let's say for my instance, I learned how to shoot with a lot of very good fundamentals and techniques from some of the gentlemen who competed in CMP matches. But then also sometimes you get not so great advice, like when I decided as a college student that I was going to accurize an M14 into an M21. Not that I don't like it. It's just my funding was not at that level at the time. So that's why it lasted 10 years. But anyways, Josh, I know we were going to introduce a lighthearted new segment. So I'll let you take it away.
Right, okay. So, as you might imagine, there are many comments made. Many by you guys, and many by other people on all of our videos. We do try, I would say, Henry, to get into the comment sections and try to provide some sort of commentary or insight and to explore some of the conversations that are there to be had. Obviously, we're able to do that a lot better with the audience in the Patreon group and the Discord group, but we still tried to get into the YouTube comments and read what you guys are writing and see what type of feedback you have for not only the type of shooting we're doing, but some questions, as Henry mentioned, about the shooting itself or about how we go about, making certain decisions with how we're going to shoot something, the decisions behind how we have stuff set up, so on and so forth. So for this particular segment, I have scoured through the comment sections and selected, 5 topics, 5 topics that we've seen posted multiple times. So the idea here is not that we're going to look at a given specific individual and try to beat them up over a certain comment or praise them over a certain comment. It's more so to allow us to provide some insight and some feedback on some of the more frequent comments or types of comments or certain trajectories that we might get at any given point in time. So what do you say, Henry? Should we get into it here?
We should, and I'm sorry I was shifting around. I know we did already have one Super Chats comment up there about an AR-10 in 6.5. Elijah, hit us up on 9holereviews@gmail.com because I did want to chat with you offline. We did have some plans on our own. We have been talking a lot about the SAS, the semi-auto sniper systems, a lot, and the viability of a bolt action sniper rifle in 308. Now, I like those, but that's a topic for another day. Elijah, hit us up on that end, and it's for another Q&A session, quite frankly. So are we ready for the what are we calling it? The insights from the internets. Anyways, a lot of these were compiled thanks to Josh. And so let's go.
All right. So this comment came off of the AK accuracy competition video where we had the 10 different variants of the Kalashnikov platform. We shot them all for groups and ranked them, and then talked about the combat accuracy of the AK platform and the effectiveness, as well as some other points to consider if you're planning to, basically use an AK. And this again is not specific to this individual commenter, but I think probably like a quarter of the comments on that video are asking, well, why didn't you shoot this one? With Zastavas being up there. What were some of the other ones? The Baril being up there is one of the main ones. Even though we've shot it and patented it on the show before in its own video, we just didn't have it in inventory when we actually did the run. Yugos were up there. Why didn't you bring on a Yugo? And there were more. Everybody has their favorite AK.
Well, I mean, you're right. Everybody does have their favorite AK. I don't know if I have my favorite AK, but I have AKs of interest, I would say, right? Like, I personally know that there's no way I'm going to get to shoot a North Korean Type 88. That's just impossible. Or a Chinese Type 97 or Type 95. It's just impossible for us to get. And a lot of times when we're doing compilation videos like that, you've got to understand the point of that video is not 100% to clock every single AK and say this is exactly what every single Kalashnikov is supposed to do, can do, or whatever. Those are samples of one. Those are representations of their respective factories of one, right? So this is for us to get an idea of what could a Kalashnikov do. And I think for me personally, a lot of that stems back from again, shooting with a CMP crowd and then shooting with the early GWAT era military NCO crowd. You get a lot of AKs are no good past 100 meters, 200 meters.
That was definitely a major thing.
Yeah.
On like when we were getting into shooting, that was one of the major components of, I would say, like lore or FUD lore or whatever you want to call it, like gun shop lore. It was like the AK is a really bad rifle because it is inaccurate. And you can't shoot it beyond like 100, 200 yards. And that's just obviously, like, we've learned over the years before even starting 9-hole how silly that line of thought or commentary is. But then as you get into actually getting the chance to shoot all of these different variants that we've been able to do on the show and seeing that all of them are, generally speaking, very effective with some minor caveats on, was it the RPK that was like crooked?
Well, I mean, okay, Romanian manufacturing QC, right? And that's a huge rabbit hole to really run down. I mean, the Romanians are interesting. You should shoot it with the idea that what's a guy Chang from The Hangover is asking you, but did you die? Right? It won't kill you because they put their quality to the right locations to where it won't blow up and kill you. But the springs are kind of wonky. They could be a little crooked on the sights. The sight rails may not be perfectly put on. It's probably pretty gritty. The trigger is not ideal. But did you die? Which, when we shot the Wasser, it was not the worst grouping rifle, but easily, I was saying too, it's not the nicest ones to shoot. But then, because of that era of the lore of how terrible AKs were, and Josh and I really got into shooting. I started in the 2004 timeframe, and Josh, when
2008, 2009.
Oh, so that was when you were. Oh, yeah, you're right. We bought the first AR receiver together.
Together, yeah.
You're together with Zaman. And back then, I remember Saigas were 199 from Academy. And that first Saiga that we showed on practical accuracy, in fact, the first practical accuracy video was a Saiga converted to an AK-103 that I'm actually not very proud of the conversion, which is why I went back and redid a new one to make it very exact. And We did that as the first practical accuracy because we knew there was a lot of lore of how inaccurate AKs were. But to be honest, your 3 MOA, 4 MOA will tag a target at 500 meters.
Don't give away too much, because there's another point of conversation in some of the other
Okay.
videos
All right,
or
right.
the
Well,
other comments I want to talk about related to that.
right, yeah, but I mean that's really what we're getting at with the how practical accuracy was born in the first place,
That's right.
and why when we did comparing 10 Kalashnikovs, which two of them weren't really, well, one of them straight up, the Czech VZ58 was
Right,
straight
just
up
straight
not a
isn't.
Kalashnikov,
Right.
and the Galil Ace is like questionably kind of like this guy behind me. Just enough parts to make it considered a Kalashnikov, but not purely. But yeah, the idea was really to get a general idea across the field from these Kalashnikovs that we had on hand, what we could do.
Right.
But in fact, we did the M76 afterwards, which was Zastava.
Mm-hmm.
And
it despite being an 8mm freight train launcher, it did pretty well, right?
yeah,
I mean, it shot pretty well.
yeah. And I think, I mean, we've got more content talking about some of the downsides of some of these systems, but in reality, are Zastava's bad? Absolutely not. I mean, they've actually got a reputation of being one of the more accurate Kalashnikovs out there, with some pretty innovative design features to them. In fact, I do have a Kalashnikov, and I've got to give a shout out to my friend Zach, who works with Brandon Herrera. He's actually working on a Zastava M70 kit for me right now. So with the original barrel, and specifically we wanted to use one with the original barrel because we wanted to get an idea of how a period Zastava with the original barrel to the post-Yugoslav wars would have fared. But anyways, that's a topic for a different day, I suppose.
Right. So ultimately, what is the final bit of commentary here is, if you guys don't see something on the show, it really at this point in time has nothing to do with the fact that we do or do not like, or are biased or not biased towards a given rifle or system. Like, we just simply haven't had time to do it, or haven't had one in inventory is almost universally the answer.
Mm-hmm. Now, before we go to the next one, there's someone actually out there who mentioned East German Kalashnikovs, and that is actually something that I would really like to personally get to try out, because I have an East German Makarov, and compared to its Russian and Bulgarian varieties, it is actually quite nice. The trigger's a lot nicer than the normal Makarovs that are out there. So that's actually a point that that's a model that I would be interested in checking out. Anyways, are we ready for the next insight?
Yeah, let's fire over to number 2.
Okay, this is a little difficult to read. Let me read it out for you. I'm a bit torn on this. You're absolutely correct that the misses on the 800 target were the fault of shooting/spotting, not the platform. However, taking away those misses removes the error from the difficulty of shooting 7.62 by 5.1 at those longer ranges compared to the other calibers. Almost felt like they really wanted this rifle to top the charts. Next step, go back to the previous videos, dismiss the misses that were due to changing wind conditions, ? Beside that, great video always. I mean, thank you. But this is bringing up the topic of, are we cherry picking on some of these, where we're looking at specific examples on practical accuracy and potentially ruling it one way or another?
Right, and this comment came out of the very recent M24 practical accuracy run, which is where we had issues at about the 800-yard line because we had really nasty wind shifts, and we didn't realize that we were getting those nasty wind shifts. And that was something that I sort of identified and used it as a way to demonstrate, like the very important role of somebody who is exclusively spotting with the shooter is, you guys know that, like, I, as somebody on range with Henry, yes, I'm working the glass and trying to give him calls based on what I'm seeing, but I'm also filming. And so my role is sort of multifaceted. And Henry and I don't have like professional spotter, what would you call it, Henry? Like
I'm not Bravo 4
skill.
qualified.
Right.
I'm not a trained sniper on that instance.
Right.
The two of us have shot a lot of long range together, but we have not gone through an official military course to be indoctrinated, would be the correct term,
Mhm.
into the skill
And
or the
so
craft.
so the skills we've learned are from, working with people who are very skilled doing it, but the language we use and the communication types that we have are not doctrinally driven. Not only that, but we routinely aren't shooting guns that are equipped with optics, or if they are equipped with optics, they're not necessarily mill optics. They might be any number of things. And so our ability to make wind calls in mills or to provide immediate corrections or commentary back and forth isn't a skill that we're like, super in depth on, to be honest. It's not something that we're like super trained together on. And we're definitely better, I would say, than we were when we started. And we've got a better setup than when we started, but it's still something that I work on to try to improve, to give, overall the correct commentary to make things better. So all of that to swing back to whether or not there's really any sort of like desire for us to have certain guns do better or not on the show or on a given run. And frankly, I think we would say that we probably have our expectations of what a rifle should be able to do when we shoot it. Sometimes those are correct, sometimes they're not. But we're not affiliated with any of these companies or any of these manufacturers or any of these rifles. So we really have no skin in the game ultimately with how it performs or doesn't perform. We show you if we miss. And that's sort of the ultimate point that I would drive home on this. Like for us, the M24 scoring better or worse, like ultimately it doesn't really affect us at all. It's what happened. But if something is exclusively our fault because we made a mistake, that was an obvious mistake, that's where we feel like we probably didn't do our due diligence or the service correctly.
So I want to take a step back on this. Whether we took the right steps or not. I know guys who are officially snipers and they don't have the the diverse types of weapon systems that we've shot. And I know it is a lot of fun to compare things top of the chart or lower on the chart and all that. But ultimately, the idea of practical accuracy is seeing how something could mechanically perform, right? If you're driving around on a track and I didn't see that there was an oil slick right there and I spun the vehicle and we continue to use that score, or would we run it around the track again and just still show you why we ran it 2 times? I mean, it's a human error right there. Clearly, it's a human error. We didn't see the wind. So whether that's from our training or not, it's not the fault of the rifle. Now, some people will then argue saying, let's say X rifle, a Kalashnikov, has trouble with wind past 400, right? So is that a wind call issue that we didn't that we had a lot of misses with 7.62 by 3.9 at the 450 yard zone? I don't think that is something worthwhile to going back to, because at that point, at the 450 mark with that particular cartridge, we do see a tremendous delineation between that and some of the other rifles. And so mechanically, the 308 is able to reach that distance if you get the wind calls correct. And for the 7.6239, even if you get the wind calls correct, there is still a tremendous opportunity or tremendous chance that you would miss a target at that distance. So regardless, we're trying to go back and look at how rifles perform on the range. And while it is fun to score things, we've got to look back and focus more on how did the rifle perform with that particular cartridge, and what is the shooter giving you guys on the feedback end that we could or could not see that we felt inside. Like if I'm telling you that I was off my game for the 800-yard shots, maybe that means that I was off the game and it's my fault. So I think a lot of times the big thing is just focus back on just watching it to learn, because we are in this process of learning about different firearms as well.
So one follow-up question then is, sometimes we get feedback like, well, you shot this gun with this particular optic and this one you shot with like an inferior optic, or on this day it was like way better weather and you shot it on a day where there was better weather, et cetera, et cetera. So I mean, provide some commentary there, because I mean, I know what the answer is, but
I mean, we're not competing in the Olympic biathlon with a freaking AK-103. We're not shooting indoors at a particular 500-yard indoor range. I mean, let's just take the program at face value for what it is. Can a crink kill you if it hits you at 500 yards? If it hits the right spot, probably. Yeah, probably if it hits the right spot, right? But on the practical accuracy side, could it compare to the What Would Stoner Do rifle? Probably not, judging by the way it performed. I mean, I think it has to be a very it's difficult to say, but you have to take a common sense approach to it. If the shooter's saying that he was having issues, then maybe take that for the face value that I don't think you should consider those shots. It's calling your shots.
Right. And that ultimately comes down to exactly it. And I still see some comments in the chat right now where people are saying like, no, like you made bad calls on other runs, but that's simply not the case. In instances where we've done that, we have gone back and annotated it and reduced the shots in almost every video we've done. Just none of them were as obvious to us as they were in this. It doesn't happen very often because we're usually Henry's pretty darn good with being able to read and call the wind at this point in time. But there have been instances where we've said, oh man, like we were using the wrong hold. That's a really good example of one that we've gone back and had to make an annotation to. And it's like, we used the wrong hold. It was an obvious shooter error. It's not a matter of not being able or not having the right wind call on this like one shot. It was an obvious shift that we identified was something that we both missed as shooters. But we showed it both ways anyway. So if you don't like it one way, you've got the raw run to see it the other way.
Okay, so I have to confess on one particular video where I absolutely wanted to see a rifle perform. The Winchester Model 1895 Russian contract. Josh, you remember that, how agonizing that was. And it was not your shoulder that particular rifle was pounding. For those unaware, we shot the only lever action we've shot on the channel so far is a 100-plus-year-old rifle. It's a Winchester 1895 lever action that feeds the Russian 7.62 54 rim that the Russians had contracted during World War I. And I shot more than 200 rounds of hand-loaded, match-grade, 174 grain .311 projectile, Varget powder-loaded, bench rest primer cartridges out of that thing, figuring out if it had heat issues or not. And it was painful to figure out that it did have heat issues, because when I zeroed it, it was actually very tight. And because of that, we don't have any match grade .311 projectiles left for any of the other 54 rim.
Henry. So, way to go.
But yeah, that's what happens when you actually try to pick things. And if it's not going to happen, it's not going to happen, quite frankly. And in that case, it did not happen with 200 rounds, and we rarely shoot 200 rounds on the course.
Yeah.
I
mean,
there's
have we ever done 200 rounds other than that one?
That's the only one. That's the only one. Like I said, I mean, I have to confess that was the only one I had an emotional tie to that I really wanted to see succeed. Now I'm seeing a highlighted comment that's popped up. Would you be interested in doing a Gewehr 43? We would, but okay, so we've got a personally, I'm humbled and floored by the amount of generosity that's in the community for us to borrow rare rifles. I mean, a Gewehr 43 is no joke rare. But we're actually looking at working with Carl over at InRange on, he's got a G43 as well. And we're looking at doing some collaborations with them. It's just, I mean, right now, my gosh, I'm shipping like 4 rifles back to their owners this week. I just finished some of the paperwork that so we ship them back with thank you letters for when people loan us stuff. And tomorrow we're receiving 5. So, and that is basically the quota is that's going to push us all the way down to Q3, Q4 timeframe for filming and evaluation. So it's killing me that
I would just say
can't just say
we have
yes.
like months of backlog at the moment.
Yeah,
In spite
and
of
that's
the fact
not
that we're like, as Henry said, all of these requests to, shoot various guns and people offering them up. It's incredible, but it's also, something we're trying to manage.
Yeah, it's if I had 40 hours a day, that would be awesome. Which, on submarines, I think they actually do 36-hour days. Regardless, it's not just what we're receiving though. It's also post-production, because
Right.
post-production takes a long time. You've seen Practical actually started as a pretty light, just shoot and drop it. That's it. Let you guys make its own conclusion initially. And so right now we've actually looked back and kind of felt that there were a few episodes that we didn't do the rifle justice because we didn't do good analyses on it. We've gone back and filmed some of those that we really wanted to see re-looked at, and done actual discussions on them. And so all that put together, the compilation, looking for footage on the research end, looking for actual research documents to put together, the post-production side is also taking a tremendous amount of time. But I wouldn't take it any other way, because
Totally.
I'm very happy with the quality of stuff that's being presented. And quality, I think, is the tenet of what we're trying to put out there for the channel. And just to lightly, before we get to the next one, yes, we have thought about shooting an M1D. Same thing. I mean, it's just, I'm trying to get a PSG one too. So, anyways, shall we go to the next?
Yeah, on to number 3.
Let's see. People keep on saying combat accuracy. Wouldn't everyone want like a more accurate rifle? Even the Russians with their constant modifications to modernize the AK.
So this gets back into the conversation we were having on point number 1. At least you started to get into a little bit. And I mean, I think that the answer to this is there's a yes and a no to this, right? Like the idea or the concept of combat accuracy is something that you've probably taught me a lot about from your military background with respect to manufacturing and logistics. And then something that I can understand based on what I do in the civilian sector for manufacturing with respect to tolerances and what it takes to get a more accurate rifle or a more precise manufacturing process that then results in a more accurate rifle, and finding the balance between those particular areas and the ability to do mass productions. And you've kind of hammered the point home to me and sort of taught me, I would say, the concept or the idea of 3 MOA is going to get you out to 500 on basically on C zones. Now, is your room for error less? Yes. Can you be even more effective with a more accurate rifle? Yes, of course. But is 3 MOA going to get you there? Yes. So if Gun Thoughts is in the chat,
Well, okay, so part of that too, how far are you shooting your particular weapon system? You don't need a 1 MOA MP5. I mean, you just simply don't. And as far as 5.56 goes, you're pretty dang effective to 400 yards. 400 meters too. 400 to even past 400. 550 meters is the max effective range for an M4A1. But really, what's your engagement distance? I mean, you're talking about 0 to 200 as most of your engagement distances. 300, you're really approaching starting to suppress and go, unless you're actually closing in on a target and trying to put them down at distance. Now, there are particular instances. I mean, this is getting into pick one territory where we're talking about METC, right? Terrain may dictate certain things. Potentially, you're trying to put the opponents at a distance between you because you've got some civilian considerations behind you. I mean, so a lot of that put aside, if you're looking at that 500 yard, 400 yard pocket, performance pocket, your 3 MOA really gets to, a torso size C-zone area out to that distance, assuming that your wind is not affecting it. But that's also a ballistics construction question, though. Wouldn't anyone like a more accurate rifle? Sure, but there's also certain things in how fast does it take to manufacture said rifle. At what scale could you put that, or how well could you scale that design out? If you're talking about, let's say, the Kalashnikov, the stamped sheet metal design may not be as conducive for accuracy, but is it going to take you considerably more time and money and manpower to mill out receivers? And is it going to be faster to press and pin a barrel into a trunnion and then rivet it into the receiver? Yes, it is much faster to do that. So at the end of the day, that also has to be a huge consideration to it. I mean, could you make something more accurate? Yes, of course you could, but I think as of recent events, a lot of us are realizing the importance to some of those, let's say, ancillary and soft requirements rather than just the how accurate is something, how expensive is something, but more so how easy is it to maintain, how light is it to push forward, and the logistics requirements behind the manufacturing and the actual deployment and usage of said weapon system. So at that point, combat accuracy may just take a secondary approach to it. You know, outside of what are you going to do with it, what's a distance engagement with it, what type of manufacturing, what type of scale are you trying to push it out, and all of that comes into context. It is not like a civilian weapon.
And
That's
I
the bottom line.
would add to just one added element to this is I think a lot of this comes down to the point of conversation where, people, I think the individuals who might fall into this category of like, well, like, is combat accuracy, the concept of combat accuracy, or that 3 MOA is sufficient, is that just sort of being an apologist for things that aren't free floated ARs, which most of the time are going to be on the tighter side of that range if they're quality built, and that is done on a mass scale here in 2022. But just if you look 10, 15 years ago when we were first getting into things, AR quality control, I mean, obviously it still is a problem with certain manufacturers today, but for the most part, like, certain ARs were not that tight either, and so it was the same. The base element of this comes back to most of the time, the rifle can outshoot the shooter, I think.
I think one of the biggest case in points that we could point at that we've actually covered in the past was the Arisaka Type 99. Now, doctrinally, the Japanese were more worried about night fighting capabilities and short range, fast target acquisition with their rifles, right? And so the type of rear sights that the Arisaka had was much more conducive to that than, let's say, an M1903 that a U.S. Marine was running on the field. Well, they didn't have the thin blade sights, but still, the Japanese sights were faster to acquire the targets. The cock on close was faster to use. The rifle actually had drain holes on different sides for optimized use in the Pacific and island hopping. It also had chrome line bores, which technically detracts from the accuracy, but again, useful for the environment. So you have sights that are less accurate, you have a barrel that's less accurate, and you have an action, and the actions, I mean, cock on open and close is about the same on accuracy, but still, you have elements to it that detract away from the accuracy, but it's still accurate enough to cause a to cause it to be an effective weapon, right? That's just one of the cases that there are other ancillary things to consider outside of just what is the most accurate rifle that you could bring into the field.
Right. I think we had a few supers that popped through here. Do you want to bring those up? From Rusty.
I am not familiar with the Mammoth Sniper Challenge. I've actually been invited to a couple of the military sniper challenges. Obviously, I would be in a sea of giants and just, ordnance guy out here hanging out with his personal rifle, representing myself by invitation. But I think, honestly, the biggest problem, and you could probably attest to this because you're a GM, matches take a lot of time that, I mean, I've got kids at home I'm dealing with.
I would stop that point of conversation or that line of it basically is, we have talked about wanting to go and shoot matches together for the last, since you came back from deployments, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's almost 7 years now. 7 years
7
now.
Yeah. 7 years.
But what it always amounts to is that the time that we would end up going and doing that, we almost always end up going and filming practical accuracy instead. And
we have to.
And frankly, match videos, I have not found a good way to make them interesting for people to watch. I think of all the ones that we've seen, some of the stuff that Polenar Tactical has done is really good. They have these really stylized, really well video. The videography is really, really good in their match footage, and it's just it's better than anything I've been able to put together shooting all of these USPSA matches and stuff where I have video of every match. It's just never that interesting, and people just generally aren't that interested in it.
Well, on the topic of matches, the brutality matches that we have had invitations to, I really want to go to one. Really, really want to go to one. Again, it just comes down to, I mean, I am scraping the barrel to find time with my family, and quite frankly, I am trying to be with my kids more when they're young. But on top of that, as far as matches go, the brutality matches are something that I actually personally enjoy how they put those together, because they, at the end of it, whether it's in range or Polinar or forgotten weapons, they're going back and thinking about things. Sometimes they have a point that they're talking about, right? Whether it's in the wintertime, if you're trying to wade through a trench, and some of the observations that they saw from that, right? And those guys having certain observations that they're looking at, and instead of, let's say, stage X, we did this. I think some of those are are some of the most interesting match videos that I've seen. And to your point, I think Giga and Mancha and Samo, they've been very good at trying to isolate certain observations that they see, whether it's on the match side or just on the range side. They're trying to delve into certain things, and there's a point to it, to the video, instead of just talking about the stage itself. And I think that makes some of the most interesting content.
And final point there before we proceed is hopefully what we're going to try to be doing with the Speedway series, I know we want to talk more about that in a minute, is to induce some of the same challenges that you run into at a match or a timed event, and then be able to capture them with the best camera setups we have in the way we want to capture them and present them, and then being able to debrief and talk about what we saw on the run. So,
and since we've actually, you guys don't know, but we've actually filmed what, 15 speedways so far?
It's something like that, yeah.
Something like that, yeah. So there, it's not just the few that have been out there. We still need to do post-production on a good amount of them. But I will say, Comblock boys, good luck on Speedway.
Yeah.
One more right here. I don't have any plans for Sharps. I would like to own one myself and shoot 1,000 because it's supposed to be a 1,000-yard buffalo rifle. I think it would be super cool.
That would be so sick.
The other one would be the Whitworth, but I would have to cast my own like angled projectiles, which, yeah.
All right, let's take us on to number 4 here, yeah?
All right, yeah. Oh. All right, so some of these I didn't even know like what Josh was throwing in here. I was actually the one who responded to this because I try not to be snippy on responding to comments, but every now and then you get stuff like this. But you wouldn't last a minute in combat. I mean, I did. I came home, so there's that. Okay, so
I just wanted to put this in there because you get these comments all the time on like all of the videos. Our comment section isn't that bad, but inevitably everybody gets these. If you make a gun video on YouTube, there's like this comment exists and will be posted. But your response just cracked me up, and I was like,
so I don't see. There's more to combat than just shooting. There's so much more to combat than just shooting.
Well, before you get into that, because I know where you're going to go with this, and I think it's the correct way to address this as a more thought out response to something like this. We, I think, try really hard to represent ourselves as not that person. Like, I have a beard, but I don't have like the tactical beard. You don't have the tactical beard. We're not like, yeah, we have some videos running around with gear on because honestly, that is what we own and how we train. But in the base level, we try our best to not over-represent who we are and what our experiences are. I'm a competition guy. Henry's a practiced long-range shooter and somebody who's also happens to have immense experience within some of the realms of military logistics, so on and so forth. So take away where you were going to head with this particular answer.
Okay. So I'm not sure which brand of Hollywood subscribes people to think that in combat you are shooting every single moment of it. But shooting is such a tiny sliver of what a soldier does. I mean, it's an important part. I mean, if you can shoot, that's very good as a soldier, and easily that's one of the skills that I'm better at than some of the other ones. I mean, and another one that I really practiced a lot on because of my personal hobbies on off-roading and basically being outdoors is navigation. And navigation is a big thing. I mean, they make jokes about lieutenants getting lost in the woods.
Yeah.
And one of my first gigs as a fresh officer, because the sergeant major back then who trained me knew that I was very interested, and I spent a lot of personal time doing a lot of long-range navigations. What do you call it? overland travels. And overland travel is not just an extended road trip, but actually going off road and pushing yourself, both your vehicle and yourself, with a compass and a map. So that's a big deal, is to get to somewhere. And then another thing is, can you use radios? Are you good on commo? Because it's not going to do anyone good if you could get to an objective and you can't radio anything in. You just start shooting. You're gonna be dead. And then how are you on physical fitness, right? And someone wrote, yeah, orienteering is the right word for civilian parlance for navigation. Land nav is what we call it. But I mean, there's so much more to it. And then on the planning side, logistically being able to prepare your men for X operations. Like famously in Black Hawk Down, they told the other soldiers to pull their night vision out, right? That's pretty bad. But there's a lot more to being in combat than just I can shoot very well, right? And I think a lot of people get really hung up on that one piece. But what we're doing, we're delving into different types of weapon systems out of our own interests, and how shooting techniques and refining different techniques, because again, it's our interest. And I think it's a big part of soldiering. It's not the only part of soldiering, but it shouldn't be the only thing that is equated with any type of combat. It should be a very well-rounded item, and that is one part of it. Mm-hmm. But anyways, I digress. This is a thank you, Bolando, for your contributions this evening. So let's see the next one.
I think we had a few supers pop in. Do you want to throw those up before we get on to the last one?
I saw a Polish flag somewhere up there. There we go. Full rifles on short range and speed course. Josh, you should cover the speed course. Talk about.
All right, I'll talk about this then really briefly. I mean, yes, we have thought about it. We've also thought about modifying the close range course and sort of reintroducing it as a thing sometime this year. Frankly, we've opted to do the Speedway series instead, I think. I would say that for the most part, the rifles depends on what type of rifles we're talking about, but like 5.56 carbines are almost universally faster from what I've done over the years shooting matches and whatnot. I'm almost always faster with them, with the exception of depending on how tight ports and movements are, which is part of why we were considering reworking some of the speed course to introduce some of those elements to complicate things a bit. But again, a lot of that comes down to whether or not people are actually interested in seeing those particular types of things, because historically speaking, the speed course hasn't had the same level of interest as the long range courses
have. Here we go.
This is a good question. Yeah, this is a good
one. Slav Supreme. Dzień dobry. Let's see. The thoughts on Tommy built G36 versus H&K MR556. Trying to decide whether I should get a Bunds clone or a USMC M27 clone. It depends. I think it depends on what you want to do with it and what you want to do aftermarket wise. I mean,
both of them are great, right? We shot both of them. Both of them did like really well, right? I mean, for what they were, as you said, for depending on what you want to do with them.
If you're looking at mounting optics, absolutely the MR556 is better. But the G36 is one of those platforms that I've personally wish had a lot more development to it.
It's such a cool rifle.
It's lightweight. I mean, cool looking aside, it's lightweight and it's actually quite accurate. It was so held back for the Bundeswehr model in particular. That Hensoldt scope that was on there. And then even if you were able to use the pick rail top, the charging handle location complicates things. Now, I'm not just like the SCAR's reciprocating charging handle, which I now have no issues with. I think it's a training thing when it comes to the G36 charging handle. But at the same time, I don't know. I lean G36 myself just because I like the idea of a super lightweight foldable rifle, foldable rifle that you could push pins and switch out certain things. But what about you, Josh?
No, I agree. When I say like the G36 is very cool, I'm not necessarily just talking about the appearance, although it is very futuristic looking. I mean, I think the idea of having an ambidextrous or accessible charging handle on both sides was a very interesting, sort of ahead of its time almost design. I'm going to end up getting chewed up in the comments over that because I'm sure somebody knows of a rifle where that had happened beforehand. But the way that it was done, its location with the built-in top rail without it being Picatinny was, I felt like it was really good. Actually, I really liked when we were shooting that.
Let's see. So they're not supers, but there's a few. Like someone was asking if we do a G11. I mean, we should. I don't know. I mean, I don't think that's ever gonna happen. Obviously, it's a G11 Speedway.
Yeah.
But anyways, I don't see anything. Let's see. M14. There's this one. I'm on the PSL. Yes.
Filmed.
Both.
Yeah.
Both PA and the Speedway as well.
All right, let's hop into insight number 5 here real quick then. Yeah. Oh, or one more super from Michael. Yeah.
Let's see. AKs like the Saiga or Vepr and 308, are they go to war or a novelty? I've owned a lot of Saigas. You know that, Josh. I'm like the Saiga collector in the past, but I've shot the 308. I know they had that stock that a lot of people like to make it look like a Dragunov. But just like the PSL, it very much turns into the Dragunov that we have at home when you do that.
Yeah. I just don't like, if I was going to do a battle rifle build, I can't really see an option other than the Scar, but that's because
AK-4D.
Yeah, I know this, but the Scar,
AK-4D roller delayed blowback system.
I don't know. I just feel like the recoil in the AK platforms is not bad in 7.62 by 3.9. Really nothing in 5.45 or 5.56. 7.62 by 3.9 is fine, even if it's over gas. But 308 is starting to get up into the territory where it's hitting me a little bit harder than I want it to, I'd say, for that type of an implementation. But that's just me.
Okay, so there's this one. I don't know what it is. Well, I don't know in what context.
Right. Okay. So this was we were talking. This is actually from the Gordon carbine video.
Okay.
And we were talking about how when we removed the suppressor, the rifle actually tightened. Like it tightened up in terms of our ability to shoot it, but it was on speed shooting. It wasn't group size. So obviously, with the respect to group size, we have taken the AEM5, put it on various Mark 12s, different manufacturing, different times of manufacturing, different a number of rounds through the system. And almost universally, the AEM5 had reductions in group size for 77 grain projectiles. Across the board, every ammunition tested. We obviously have that in all of the Mark 12 content that's been put out. In the Gordon video, I was talking about how removing the suppressor decreases the amount of pressure coming back into the action, which in and of itself means that the rifle is actually feels softer to shoot. Then we're also exposing the OpSync brake, which is a darn good brake for just being like a single port open brake. And so we were able to shoot and print a much tighter recoil test string with the carbine, with the Gordon carbine, without the suppressor attached. And so this was actually I think this conversation was actually worthwhile because I think you and I can sometimes talk about that as if everybody knows exactly what we're talking about with respect to the suppressors. And, it might be worth just exploring that further.
Yeah, the AEM5 in specific, and now I'm seeing that there's actually AEM5 clones out there on the market too, that they're made of titanium, so they're lighter than my all steel construction AEM5. That's strong. But the system itself is, like Josh said, across the board. The AM5, I don't know if it's from the specific harmonics that it does to the barrels, but they seem to really tighten the groups. But the downside, as we've seen in the Speedway video, running the AEM5 that traps a significant amount of heat, especially if you're not running a suppressor wrap. And even if you are, past the extra 20 rounds that you'll get through it, the AEM5 really gives you a lot of Mirage. And outside, I'd say Mirage is a problem for long range. So you must say, a hot suppressor is no worries for the close range door kicker, eh? Well, you try to lay one of those on your lap accidentally, and you tell me the same thing afterwards. Regardless, heat is most definitely a thing that I don't think we had previously covered as much on suppressor talk, which I don't really want to go into more of the nitty gritty and give things away, but there is one particular suppressor that we're talking about down the road that actually did really well with heat. And it has some really interesting design characteristics that specifically was working with the heat mitigation. So
that's that one.
Let's see. There was also another one that popped up here.
So yeah, okay. I mean, this is good. We did probably have we probably had a very detailed conversation of this in the Mark 12 Speedway video. It was in the optimized Mark 12 Speedway video.
Mhm.
And we went into a great level of detail. So if you're interested in this particular subject, I'd say that's a good resource to go watch the debrief on. But I think what I said was something to the effect of, in a gamer gun, you basically have your muzzle device, your extended length gas system, your lightened internals and tuned buffer system, and your optic that's able to reach 8 power, maybe 10 power with some of the new offerings out there. And the Mark 12 systems hit like pretty much all of those with the exception of the lightweight internals. Where you start to see the major differences is in the weight of the systems. The Mark 12 is heavy. It's a heavy rifle. At least the mottos. I mean, even with the carbon fiber handguards, I think they're reinforced, right? So you've got, and the full top rails, like they're not light. And the Harris bipods are heavy. So you get a lot more weight there, which aids in recoil. And conceptually, if I'm going to set the rifle up as some sort of precision based system or DM system of some sort, or SPR system, right? It's that help me on the distance. And on the gamer guns, they're generally more lightweight because you want to be able to move faster with them. I see the greatest variables in that area, your ability to move quickly with the guns, not in how they shoot. I actually think they shoot almost identically.
Yeah, I think there's no free lunch. That's the bottom line. And that kind of goes back to this previous topic about this whole trope about combat zero combat accuracy is stupid. Wouldn't anyone want more accuracy? Bottom line is yes, people would want more accuracy, but at what cost? Is it cost by weight? Is it actual cost by manufacturing? Is it actual cost by let's say accessibility or ammunition constraints? I mean, there's always some type of constraints that you just have to weigh it. And on that topic, somebody talks about there's a comment on the SCAR 20 that is relating to that. I can relate to this a little bit. The SCAR is a really interesting system in my opinion. And Josh, he's talking about SCAR 20 and 6.5. The SCAR is a really interesting thing where it is able to be accurate, lightweight, and low recoil at the same time. I mean, those are 3 points that are very difficult to hit on. Because let's look at my AK4D. It's accurate. It's somewhat low recoil if I put a brake on it, most certainly. but it's most certainly not lightweight. I mean, that thing is a pig to lug around.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, there's just so many different things that could skew that, but the Scar for some reason is able to balance those three. Now, people will complain about the reciprocating charging handle, whether you get the new one that is non-recip or the old one. I think the old one is trainable and there is value to a reciprocating charging handle. But, to each his own.
Cool. How
Let's
about onto
see.
the Patreon question?
We do have one Patreon question. Here we go.
Right.
For the Speedway series, is there any criteria for rifles? I'm guessing that will get featured in those episodes. I.e., is it limited to scope semi-autos that can reach out to 650/720, or will there be versions of guns with shorter and longer max practical engagement ranges? Bottom line is no, it is not limited to scoped or semi-autos. You've already seen the M24. We do have iron sights on Speedway. And we do have rifles that have trouble reaching out to 650/720. And we do have rifles that surprised both Josh and I that they were able to reach out to those distances and actually score the hits. So I think really we were flying with that pretty loose on what we were going to do. Basically, we wanted to see if something made sense or would be interesting to see pushed under speed. Because a lot of times the Speedway is an interesting thing in a sense that practical accuracy, I may not have to be on my best game that day to actually still ring out the accuracy on a rifle, because I could have the time in between to kind of rest up, collect my thoughts, think about what I'm going to do, really experiment with the mechanical accuracy of a system. But Speedway is a different story. I have to have my breakfast that morning. It's like you preparing for a competition. If you are unable to think clearly that day, you're not going to succeed in Speedway, and that would directly skew the exercise. And we've actually decided not to do Speedway in one particular day because of our condition, both of us. We're not at the mental state to really do Speedway that one particular day. So I think Speedway is an interesting thing that really brings out a lot of stresses to the shooter and particularly to the rifle as well that you don't see on practical accuracy normally.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we did say is that we're going to try to limit the rifles we run on Speedway to those that ran decent to better than decent on the PA series. Like if something does bad on PA, where we realize that like either something's not perfectly right with the gear or the gun, or frankly we just can't seem to connect with it, we're probably not going to waste the ammo on Speedway, because Speedway is much harder than the PA runs. Much harder. So I
will
think
say
that's the only stipulation.
Josh, you may know which rifle I'm talking about. There is one particular rifle that I pressed onto Speedway because I know people were going to be asking about it, and it did not do very well.
Yeah.
And we're still going to publish it because this is practical accuracy stuff. Okay, so let's see. This is a really good question, actually. He's about to build an AR-10, debating on whether he wants a 308 or 6.5 Creedmoor. Does he have to reload, or chambers less tight or more tight than a bolt action? I think both of those cartridges are good for your AR-10. I think the big thing is what are you going to do with it, right? And what is your logistics looking like? Is it easy or is it difficult for you to obtain 7.62 NATO or 6.5 Creedmoor, I would say? Let's say our friends over in Europe, it's significantly more difficult for them to obtain 6.5 Creedmoor. It also depends on, let's say, a lot of people like to say, yeah, the military should adopt 6.5 Creedmoor for everything. I disagree, because it is significantly more difficult in the military supply system currently as it is to supply 6.5 Creedmoor, because your machine guns are also all running 7.6251. And it's actually, you would be alarmed at how frequent it is to delink machine gun ammo or use ball ammo in some of those rifles. I mean, not all the time, obviously, but that is a logistical supply to where you have a source of ammo to still clear targets at 500 yards, which is the next question, or the next part of that is, how far are you shooting? Do you need a quick follow-up shot to it? Are you shooting in high wind locations and you could sacrifice in saying the easy logistics of 308? So, I mean, those are just a few things that I would throw out there, Josh. I don't know if you have anything else.
Well, additional considerations from my side are, obviously the ammunition piece you've covered extensively in terms of availability and accessibility. I would say, because this is an AR-10, presumably one that's being put together by the Big Red Doggy, we can worry less about having to swap out barrels. So obviously 6.5 is going to chew your barrel up a lot faster than the 308 will. The extent at which you need to be swapping the barrels will come faster on 6.5. I think we've decided that pretty universally at this point. But if it's on the AR-10 platform, presumably you can just wrench that off yourself. So in my mind, that would be a reason to run it in 6.5, but that's coming from somebody who has a, like SAS setup in the TX10 that's in 308. So,
Let's see. Zastava or Arsenal? I would say it depends. It depends on if you want to. It depends on, honestly, it depends if you're a collector or not. If you're a collector, then, and you could find an SLR 104 FR that is an actual blueprint copy of the AKS 74, like the one that Josh has, absolutely. If you could pick it up for a decent price, absolutely, that would be a good choice. If you're a shooter, probably get a Zastava and not be heartbroken if you ding it up or do anything to it or break it or explode it. So
do you remember when I almost chopped up my 104 FR?
Yeah,
you were like, don't do this, it's bad,
Yeah.
don't do this. And I was like, but it's only like a $900 rifle. I can, if I have to, I could go get another one if it just turned out really bad or I wanted an original setup. Oh my, I owe you, I don't know what, half of the profiteering on that.
And I will take that in cash or check or blood diamonds. But the AKs are a really interesting thing. I mean, same thing right now. If you're looking at the barrels that are out there, manufactured in the Radom factory, and to presumably similar in semi-auto specs to the Polish issued Vizor 96s. I mean, that's a pretty good deal because you're getting something very comparable to a service weapon, to the blueprint. Same thing with your SLR 104 FR. That is a blueprint AKS 74. Now, the current Zastavas, I mean, there's nothing wrong with the Zastavas currently. They're not manufactured to the same specs as the old Zastavas, like the one that I'm having built, because I am interested in how the military configuration and the performance of the military weapon would have been or is from that era. But if purely you're thinking about shooting it, I mean, go with the one that makes economical sense. But if you're collecting, that is a very, very, very long rabbit hole to dive into at the AK Files, which you could promptly say hello to Rob Ski, who hangs out on the AK Files a lot. Let's see. Right underneath that, Mongo, drop us a note over email. Again, we talked about earlier. I mean, hats off and our gratitude to all the people who are opening their arsenals to us to test. It's quite incredible. But right now, I'm stacked to Q3 on stuff to do. But I mean, if you're in Houston, just drop us a note, and we're locals. Let's see. Oh, same guy wants a crink on the speedway again. That's just
No.
the
We
way
got
that
one
would turn out.
from
You
Tennies.
would be waving the crink around and have some of your lackeys to fire off some RPG 7s at the speedway targets and dust them all, and then you go home when your gold crink. Let's see. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I mean that does mean a lot. I mean, again, we say this all the time, but like without you guys, there really wouldn't be any point of us doing this.
Okay, all right. Sorry. Zastavas do not have a reputation of exploding. That was just me saying stuff. I want to make it clear. Zastavas, of all the rifles, the AKs out there, do not have a reputation of exploding. Now, the old ones have a reputation of rusting if you're shooting corrosive ammo through them and not cleaning them. Yes, that is an issue. They also have a reputation of being carved up with blood carvings. That is a thing. I got one with those, but exploding is not an issue. Let's see.
So this next one from T-Bar is interesting. I'd like to talk about it a little bit before we wrap up here. I know we're getting basically to the end of the session.
Yeah.
You are the king of the 10 power. 10 power everything all the time, never more, don't need more unless you're going like to a K or beyond, or like beyond a K basically. And I'm like the total opposite. I love extra magnification. Like, yes, probably because my eyes suck compared to your eyes. But I think that there is obviously there's points of diminishing return with your magnification, right? Like nowadays there's like 35 power stuff that's out there, or up to 35 power. That's the standard in PRS stuff. But we rarely see shooters actually on 35 power. Usually, what, Henry, we've read or talked to some of these guys and they're saying like 16, 18 power is usually where they're at on, they're shooting much tighter targets in many instances, or some that are much harder to PID than what we're shooting at, which are usually really nice painted full flat targets that we know exactly where they are and we're not trying to move or go in and out of the optics on.
Well, yeah, that's what it comes down to. I mean, what are you trying to do with it, right? I like 10x because I think 10x covers a lot of ground when you're shooting torso-sized targets out to 1,000. Now, is 10x the best for observation? Which, if you were a sniper, that would be your primary task, is to observe. Which that's also a loaded question, because are you trying to area observe? You have better situational awareness. You have a wider field of view with less magnification. With 10x, you're able to spot. Let's say you're able to mill things out with your reticle, well enough to get a decent accuracy with your distance milling. By the way, using your mill dots, which mill dots are for distance judging instead of primarily using as holdover points, although you can obviously use them as holdover dots. And that's, a lot of those things come in play. I am used to using 10x because that is enough for me to observe a lot of the changes downrange that could affect my follow-on shot. And I also have a wider field of view. I also think glass quality matters. And I was also shooting at an era. Yeah, I was also shooting at an era to where glass quality is not as they were nowadays. And back then, no matter how much you get on magnification, your glass quality is not there to match that high magnification to get you that definition on your target. So then instead of seeing more, you end up shrinking your field of view. Now, that's changed, and a lot of people, like to use higher magnification to observe some of those changes. But I still think 10x is a pretty good, pretty decent range balance between seeing the target, seeing the environment, being able to hop back onto the environment after recoiling. And I mean, it's just enough. Now, closer than that, I like to dial down. If I'm shooting, let's say, 1 to 3, I prefer to use 4x, but that's a different story.
Yeah, I would say the final thought on this before we move on to the last super here is the idea of just because it can go higher doesn't mean you have to dial it higher. And a lot of the times on variable power optics, the glass looks the best not at the max magnification, as Henry is sort of alluding to there to a degree. And if you're able to have, say, like a 4:16, which is the Night Force that we shot on the optimized Mark 12 video on Speedway, that particular optic is, I mean, one of my favorites that fits this sort of like mid-range rifle, setup that can go anywhere from 0 out to 1,000 plus, with depending upon what the rifle or in the caliber you're shooting it on is.
Yeah, I mean, I hate saying it, like it all depends, but it really does. I mean, what are you trying to do with it? If you're shooting 22s, you actually want a larger magnification, because with a 22, the 22 competition guys actually use it up to like 30x to observe their targets, because that's how they see if they hit or not. Because the effects of a 22 is so minor and you have so little recoil that you actually use that to observe your effects. Now this one, Josh knows I am looking for a Sako TRG, but I keep on spending money on other things. And oh my gosh, I just spent more money this week too. Okay, nobody's back there listening. Let's see. Clay's on the chat here.
If you guys don't know Clayco, you should definitely check out his YouTube. Dude runs a AK as fast as anybody I've seen run an AK. It's pretty sick.
I don't know why he got all those posties, man. I don't know why he got all those machine guns. He doesn't need it. Just keep it on Title 1. His trigger finger is good enough.
Yeah.
Just drop an ALG.
His builds are wild too. They're all like super like wild race builds and like crazy stuff you never see on AKs. So it's a fun one to go check out. If you get
he swings from that to Buck Purvis. But Clayco, yeah, highly recommend checking Clay's channel out if you're into clashes. Clay and I actually shoot around the same area, so we've actually been talking about meeting up more and more actually. And they run Clash Bash, so if you're in the Houston area or you're interested in Clash Bash, check it out.
Awesome.
Oh, no way. Hold on. I know we're supposed to wrap up, but I was on Dragoon Ride in 2015 with Second Cav, and that audio outro sound was actually recorded through through our headset when we were calling Redcons. And I don't know who hit us up on the back end to let me know who you were with, Sean. Yeah, so if you guys were wondering, and I'm about to play the Redcon as we pop out, we're calling up Redcon reports before we head out on convoy, which is basically checks for everyone on convoy, talking about are you ready? Do you what's the status of the convoy before you head out? And that was actually filmed or recorded on the Russian border. Right after they annexed Crimea, and USER General, the USER commanding General Hodges, was like, basically the Russians didn't think that we could run logistics convoys for that long. And General Hodges was like, yes, we can. And he had Second Cav and a bunch of Cav dudes run the Striker Reg up and down to the Baltic states, all the way back to Germany. And every single small town we went to, we would go and say hi to the locals. So That's one of the ways I got to see a lot of the former Comblock states who became NATO, like Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Poland, Czech Republic. We did a lot of stuff with, anyways. I mean, same thing with Poland, but yeah, that brings a lot of memories back. But there was one more, I think.
Yep, just rolled in. Let's answer this one, and then we'll call it here. I mean, this is an easy one. I mean, I think that we really like the ACSS. I would say my experience with it is on the LPVO side mostly, and the new PLXC and the reticle that they put in that has the stadia in it that drive to the center donut. Answered a lot of the I don't know if I call it a criticism, but a lot of my concerns with the SLX Raptor and even the Griffin mill in terms of its ability to be used on one power. I just tend to love the stadia drawing to the center of the optic, and really like it in the new PLXC.
I think we've got some upcoming videos of that particular optic that absolutely slayed on the course too.
Mm-hmm.
And unlike the previous PLX, and the PLX is the Japanese glass line that the primary arms guys run. The glass on I would say the old PLX is a little cleaner. I mean, obviously, whenever you cut weight like that, you end up with different light transmission through glass.
Yeah, looking at them directly side by side, I thought that the full heavy boy just felt a little bit crisper to me, but
it's a lot lighter. The new one, it's like almost half the weight.
I thought it was over 10 ounces lighter.
Yeah, it's one of the lightest LPVOs out there on the market.
Yes, so unbelievable.
Oh my gosh. Okay, we've got what is this last one that?
Thank you guys. We appreciate your questions. We'll finish with this one then. Yeah.
Was Speedway inspired by PRS?
I mean, not necessarily PRS specifically. More so just 3-gun or IPSC rifle, because the idea being like, balance the speed with the precision. On PRS, there's more onus put on at least the types of matches I've watched on PRS. You have a limited number of rounds you can fire. Now, I'm not a PRS shooter, so I don't actually know. So someone double check me if you know if this is incorrect. But I've always seen like it's 10 targets, you have 10 shots. And if you miss one of the shots, you don't collect a hit on the target. So that's not necessarily what we are doing with respect to Speedway. If you miss on Speedway, you can keep shooting until you get it, which is more 3-gun inspired. And then pushing the performance, the optimized Mark 12 is going to be very, very hard to beat, in my opinion. Yeah. Very hard to beat.
I think, honestly, Speedway was not necessarily inspired by PRS, but inspired by a lot of the people out there in the community, like you guys watching right now, in talking about some of the things that practical accuracy alone could not cover. So through the few years of running practical accuracy, we've identified some things that absolutely you don't see. The stress, heat stress, the stress on time that would put both the shooter and the weapon system to the test. I think a lot of those things were, we had in the back of our minds, how could we answer these questions? How could we actually put this to the test? Not necessarily that, is it PRS related, but how can we further delve into these topics that actually are very interesting, but the mechanism of normal practical accuracy does not cover. And so that's when we got to the point where we wanted to do practical accuracy extra. What's the extra factor? Then it comes to time. How do we do it? What makes sense? How do you continue to challenge the shooter? And let's say dialing would take more brain power than just looking at a ret, maybe, or vice versa. I mean, I don't know. And then throw in a bonus in there. A lot of these things that we were throwing around in our minds. And I think right now we're looking at filming 15 or so far. I think it is a good representation of further delving into some of the best rifles that have come out of the Practical Accuracy series and how we could further evaluate them.
Yep, 100%. What do you say? That's an hour 30, almost on the button. I think we covered off we wanted to cover off, and got a chance to talk to you guys and answer a bunch of your questions.
Yeah. So everyone out there, I mean, if you guys have any thoughts, drop it in the comments section. Send us an email, shoot us a note, check out our Patreon if you're into that. In the back end, we do talk a lot on the Discord. And without anything else, I guess we're just left to seeing everyone on the range the next time.
See you guys.
Take care. And
716 is Steel Knight 6, 4 Vic, 8 packs, Redcon 1, green to green. How copy, over?
Steel Knight 6, this is 716, roger, over. 16, Steel Knight 1, 1 pack,